So a few weeks ago, I made a video entitled "Being a First Generation Graduate Sucks." And I must admit that of all the videos that I've ever hit publish on, this was probably the one that I felt most nervous for. And a few days later, I received a message from my sister. She said, "Wow, you're really going for the jugular, huh?" And I started panicking a bit when I received that message. I started thinking, have I made a mistake by publishing it? But actually, my sister was like, you're speaking your truth, so that's always a good thing. And I was really delighted with the comments I received under that video. If you haven't seen that video, it is still up on my channel. You can go and view it whenever you want to. And there was a specific comment left under that video, which inspired today's video. And I want to read the comment to you. "I haven't heard anyone else talk about this before, and it's so validating. Not having a major history of academia in my family has become a source of so much pressure. I feel this sense of urgency to change things, so much so that it prevents me from being able to tell what I really want to do. I want to go to university, and I have ideas for after I graduate, but it feels completely daunting. It's like a constant battle between passion and what seems rational, what will make me happy but is stable and can provide the most money. How did you know what you wanted to do? How did you rule everything else out?" So in today's video, I am going to talk you through my own academic journey, and I'm starting all the way from, my last few years of primary school. So please do grab your beverage of choice and let's get into this video. The primary school I attended is like 80% responsible for the person, making this video. My entire value system came from that school. They quite literally raised me. I was there, staying at school from 5 to 12. So they had me for my most formative years, and with that comes the opportunity to build a person. So I was really passionate about music. At that time, I was playing 3 instruments. Piano was my main instrument. I also played the recorder, and I also played the glockenspiel, which is a lesser known instrument. It looks a lot like a xylophone, and it's so interesting because I was convinced that nobody else knew this instrument. And actually, just this past week, somebody mentioned it to me, and I was like, can we bond over the fact that we both know this instrument? Anyway, so those were the 3 instruments I was playing. I was very heavily involved in the orchestra. I was like really deep in my music bag. That was like what I did, really. The music department was the place where I felt like I had the deepest sense of belonging. Things did start to change a little bit, as just a year prior, I had actually lost my music teacher. She sadly passed away. I actually talk about this in a podcast episode of mine. It's entitled "The Minute the Lunch Bell Goes." I will link to it in the description box, and I'll put a little picture reference over here. So as you can imagine, losing my music teacher at a really young age as a really promising musician was really hard, and it obviously, on top of it being personally like a lot to deal with, the grieving process, etc., it obviously also put my kind of music progression on hold, and everything was just really a bit all over the place. I eventually got a new music teacher, but I can't remember the reason, but I was not able to progress with my actual music examinations. So for most instruments, it's from grade 1 to grade 8. I had done my grade 1 exam, and I'd done my grade 2 exam, and obviously I was showing no signs of stopping. So in Zimbabwe, we still do to this day have a really cool kind of competition festival thing where students from all other schools come together to compete. It's quite nice because you're graded individually, so it was really interesting for me to be amongst other students who were equally as good. This kind of reminds me of an interview that Condoleezza Rice did. Not that I'm comparing myself to her, but I think it's quite special how this part of both of our stories kind of aligns. She had actually also been a pianist. She had actually initially gone to university to pursue a degree in music, and it wasn't long into her first year where she actually dropped music, because for the first time, having gone from being the top of her high school, she was now surrounded with students who were equally as passionate about music. And then she realized that actually, in the grand scheme of things, she wasn't that amazing. And I can say that because truly, I had the same experience. To this day, I will not forget that Chinese boy in, the same heats as me, and I stayed fit. I will not forget what he performed. He got honors, and that was such a shock to my system, because I was like, wow, I might be hot stuff here. But in the grand scheme of things, is it really giving Juilliard? Possibly not. And you can imagine that my African family was all too, well, they didn't show that they were ecstatic that I came to this realization, but I think I can assume that my mom was probably feeling very reassured that she didn't have to have the hard conversation about, music isn't really an option for you with me, because I'd kind of like put the dots together like, the math isn't mathing here. Genuinely speaking, I was quite inconsistent academically. I think I was doing okay. It was not a stress about whether I'd get into high school. That was all fine. I think I did get a few awards to do with languages. So English was my safe subject. I'd also been doing remedial lessons, and I don't know why this was the mentality, but I'm just here to report how it was. And for me, the fact that I was in remedial lessons for maths, I think it was maths, yeah, was to me an indication that I wasn't that bright. I was just it is what it is, at least now I know. So that's where I was kind of mentally in my final year of primary school. And then of course we moved to the first 2 years of high school. So right off the bat, my mom did not want my sister and I at different schools, and my sister is, very good at sport. She was a star athlete at the time, and so naturally she, being older than me, she started high school at a very sports-centered high school, and of course I followed, a year later, again because my mom didn't want us at different schools. Unfortunately, the school did not have a music department. That made the decision for me. I had formally stopped my music progression, which was really heartbreaking, but at the same time, if you've seen some of the videos off of my boarding school and bubble tea series with my sister, you'll know that the first year of high school, moving on to grade 4 exam pieces, was the furthest thing from my mind. So my next form of motivation actually came in the form of academics, believe it or not. So in the high school that I went to, they streamed us academically. So there were 4 streams, A1, A2, B1, B2. I was very delighted to make it into the top set. I worked really hard. I do remember studying hardcore just to get into the top set. To this day, I think it was the best thing that happened to me. One, because it was so validating, and to be placed in the top set amongst really, really smart kids was, I can't even express to you how happy it made me. Honestly, for the entire duration of high school, my job was to stay in that top set, and I worked really hard to stay in that top set. Another interesting thing to note about this point in time was that within those first 6 weeks before we were streamed, we were given 2 language options. So we had to do 3 weeks of Afrikaans, 3 weeks of French. Interestingly enough, I did well in both. So surprisingly, wasn't expecting to do well in Afrikaans. It might seem strange to think about, but I hadn't connected the dots at this point. I thought English was just the language I speak. Of course I'm good at English, I use the language every day. But at this point in time, I was okay, I'm noticing a pattern here. I really vibe with languages. So that was another page in my book. Of course, when it came to choosing, to me, it was a no-brainer. I was definitely going to do French. I do remember my Afrikaans teacher being what? Then in my second year of high school, I actually, again, more personal stuff that will be detailed in my memoir, but I missed a term of school, an entire term of school. And you can imagine how tragic that was when I returned to school just in time for examinations. Not very good, and of course that put my spot in the top academic set in jeopardy. I don't know which staff members vouched for me in that staff meeting when I was this close to being dropped, but honestly, I just hope that they always have a good day. And then that brings me on to the middle 2 years of high school. So at this point in time, the stars aligned so perfectly for me because it felt like a fresh start, because in Form 3, you start the IGCSE O-level syllabus. Genuinely, it was starting afresh. It didn't matter anymore that I'd missed a term of school because we'd started a new syllabus. Everybody was new to this, and I loved that for me. So of course, all of our subjects, I will not forget the first day of Form 3, all of our teachers just lectured us about, the fun and games being over, and it was time to get serious with our lives because we'd started our preparation for our first public examinations. The other cool thing that happened at this time was, obviously I had already known that I was not a science person. No girl in STEM here, definitely through and through, I'd always known I was good at the arts, and that was about it. Because at this point in time, because you're all preparing for your exams, A1 and A2, so the top 2 sets kind of get merged in a way. So because my STEM skills, my sciences and my maths weren't really looking like A1 standard, I'd actually low-key been put into A2 for those subjects. So it was really cool because the A2 kind of group, if you will, they didn't have to do pure chemistry and pure physics. They had a combination of both called physical science, combination of physics and chem. Obviously it had less like stoichiometry and the difficult aspects of like chemistry. I loved nothing more than the fact that they put me in an easier group, and also the maths group. Obviously I was separated from most of the A1s, and can I tell you guys, I had the most fun, especially in maths. Like my maths teacher was amazing. She was just so good at her job, and she just understood the fact that we needed things to be explained a couple times over in order to get them. So like I mentioned, at this point in time, I was getting a glimpse into like STEM versus the arts. It was very interesting for me to start realizing that I was the minority. So actually in the A1 class, 99% of the students, I might have been the 1%, me and another girl, we were like the only ones who were arts inclined in A1. So I do remember feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome. When everyone that you're in a class with is like science and math smart and you're English and French smart, there's a lot of moments of reflection where you're like, am I supposed to be here? So at the end of my O-levels for O-break or O-breezy, I went to Geneva, and that was such a great trip. It like really broadened my horizons, because prior to that, all I knew was like Zimbabwe. Yes, I'd done, regional travel here and there, and I had been to Switzerland prior, but when I was much younger. So being in Geneva when I was 16 and really starting to think about what would come after high school, honestly, pivotal. It's such a pity that I don't have any of these pictures, but believe it or not, guys, I have a beautiful picture in front of UNICEF. Years later, I would end up getting a UNICEF internship. So it was just really, really helpful just for my mentality to be like, okay, there's actually more to life than Zimbabwe. Being somebody who had already from the jump been inclined to an international career, there are few places that are going to top Geneva to really get exposure to that kind of world. And I was like, yeah, this is the vibe. And then of course that brings me very nicely to the final 2 years of high school. So these were my A-level years. Of course, naturally, what did I do for my A-levels? The arts. No surprises there, except there was a surprise. In my first year of lower six, I remember one of my science teachers got out his car and he was like, why weren't you in class? Guys, I was genuinely shook. I was like, why wasn't I in class? He was like, yeah, you went in physics. And I genuinely like looked at him like, has it not been obvious to you since you met me in Form 1? Like, I was like, no, I'm doing the arts. I'm doing English Lit, English language, French and history. In Zimbabwe, like, it very much is giving like what even are the arts. Like, if you want a proper future, stop playing and get yourself a science degree. He was like, are you trying to be a lawyer? And at that point in time, we're going to talk about this, I was trying to get a law degree. That kind of settled him. Naturally, I want to talk about the other side of my final 2 years of high school. At this point in time, I was so grateful because there were a lot more extracurricular activities that I could be involved in as a result of now being a senior. More opportunities to get involved in community work, which I'd been passionate about, but I lacked the opportunities to actually do something practical with it. I was secretary of the service committee, which was great. Service did exactly what it said on the tin, so helping the local community. There were lots more opportunities to sharpen like my leadership skills. This was things like being selected to be a prefect, the head of my hostel, and also being selected onto the steering committee of the Toastmasters Society. I just loved these extracurricular activities that had nothing to do with my studies, because I knew it's okay if you know like what a literary device is, but like, do you know how to public speak? Because by this time I already knew like what kind of career I was going towards. Honestly, stuff to do with the UN, if I'm honest, like international organizations. At that point in time, all I knew was the UN. Of course, now several years later, my horizons have been broadened significantly, but it was a great guide because I knew what the vibes were. And that leads me onto my gap year. I'm going to call it a gap year, but really it was just a little break. In Zimbabwe, the academic calendar follows a calendar year. So school starts in January and ends in like November or December. And so I finished my A-levels in November, and universities begin their academic year in September. So I had January through August, September to kind of figure life out. This, once again, was such a transformative transitional period. I had this great opportunity to volunteer in Kenya, great exposure. Also, I decided to while away the time by starting a blog So I realized that actually I was out of formal education and nobody was expecting an essay from me on Monday. And I was really scared about losing my writing skills. It was my first creative endeavor. Shout out to you if you remember the Le Blog de la Mia era. I eventually, drew that blog to a close. But, I'm just so grateful. I think I did it for 2 or 3 years. Honestly, zero structure. I just used to write about anything and everything. But I had a great time. And honestly, I attribute starting that blog when I was 19 for all the confidence I now have to just pick up a camera, talk to a camera, and hit publish and share this video online. And just my other creative pursuits. Honestly, Le Blog de la Mia walked so that global narratives and this YouTube channel could run. The stuff that really mattered, the insight that I really gained from this gap year was the stuff I can't articulate, the stuff I can't really put on a CV. It was just really getting acclimatized to the reality of life and the reality of life in Zimbabwe. Prior to that, all I'd ever known was boarding school. I had been in the bubble that is boarding school from age 5 until 18. And look, I'm not critiquing them for doing this, but you really are sheltered in these environments. You have very little clue about what's going on in the world around you. So this was really being thrown into the deep end, and I just remember being confused about a lot of things. My mom will always bring up the fact that, I don't know who it was, my sister or me, when the electricity went out at our house, one of us had said why did it go? And my mom was like, because it goes sometimes. What did we know about that lifestyle? We were in an environment where the minute the electricity would go, the generator would be switched on in a matter of seconds. Truly, it was an eye-opener, and it was not gentle. I realized that I actually had zero social life at this point. I never had to think about my social life because I lived with my friends at school. If anything, I saw too much of them. I also want to talk about the application process. So of course, by this time I had begun applying to university. I had initially at this point thought, do you know what? I am going to Canada. I know it sounds really delulu, so I need to talk about why this was the case. All my life, my sister and I had been told, you will end up in Canada. My dad spent some of his youth in Canada. If I could tell my 19-year-old self anything, it would be have a really, really difficult family meeting, if you will, and ask for them to give it to you straight, because we did not have the means for me to be pursuing a 21,000 tuition fee program at a Canadian university. I kind of knew, but also I don't know. Truly, whenever I'm hesitant to tell this story because it really makes me look like I was living in a different reality, and I probably was. I really wish that we'd had a conversation about this before I low-key wasted my time doing these applications, and for what? The one thing I will say I gained from these was such a boost in my confidence, because I actually got into both programs. The first one, honestly, it was one of those where I was okay, I think I'm going to get into this program. The second one, to this day, I'm really proud that I got into that school. I applied for political science for both. One was in Nova Scotia. The second one was in Montreal. Yeah, of course I couldn't go as a result of them being just way too expensive. I glaze over that now, but guys, at 19 years old, I won't say that I was bratty, but you guys need to understand that I was just coming out of a system where the meritocracy was meritocracying. If I wanted something, all I had to do was work hard, and it was almost guaranteed that I'd get it. Now I was thrown into the big bad world where working hard and feeling like you deserve something was no longer enough. Cue the disillusionment process. So I remember being gutted. I remember shedding so many tears, not understanding, dude, I worked so hard, didn't think I'd get into the school, but now I got in. They just sent me the welcome package and everything, and I can't go. Of course, you can't do law as an undergrad degree in Canada, or the States for that matter. So the options were looking quite limited. I wanted to do international / human rights leaning law. The only place you could really do that was the UK, and again, just way too expensive. Of course, there were other options, a British university located in a Malaysia or a Mauritius. But generally speaking, I was look, if I can't go to Canada, I'm definitely going to go to Europe. It's just what I wanted. I don't want to sit here and justify why I wanted what I wanted. All the astrology lovers, I'm a Taurus. There's only so much you can persuade me about. I want what I want, and I'm going to see it through. Even at 19, this is really how I was. Bless the people that have to deal with me. So as you can imagine, things are looking pretty dire at this point. It's looking am I having to take a year out and and re-strategize, like, what is my life coming to? So like I mentioned, I went to Kenya, and I think it happened while I was in Kenya. My mom had seen this flyer advertising Italian universities for like a very affordable price, and on there she had seen philosophy, international studies, and economics. I said, I'll take it. I went into full-blown on it mode, contacted the agency. Of course, being an agency, they have to take it easy with how much information they give you, and I just remember going in the one day and asking one of the agents, like, where is the school located? Because I knew it was in Italy, but I was like, which city? She was like, Venice. Googled it, obviously, like, how many universities are there in Venice? I think there's 3. Yeah, I just kind of made sure that it was happening, because at this point it was like my only option. And I also want to mention it was quite late in the year. It was like April, May-ish. So I was like, it's literally this or nothing. So yeah, that was how I actually ended up studying philosophy, politics, and economics in Venice, in Italy. So was it law? Not quite. Was it similar in like the same kind of arena as something I wanted to do? Yeah, and of course I have to tell you about my university years. As I arrived there, I was like, look, is it what I wanted initially? No, it's, it wasn't even like part of the initial plan, but it's where I am now. And my mom always likes to remind my sister and I that, sometimes it's a stepping stone. She loves that expression. And truly, like, my time in Italy was a stepping stone, and I never lost sight of that. I took advantage of everything. I was in, the Venice Diplomatic Society. I was in another society, but that's a podcast episode. I made sure that I made the most out of it. I had quickly found out about exchange programs, and I wanted more of a challenge, just academically, just in terms of, where I was. Venice is quite limiting. It's a small island. It's quite a transitional place. People are there for like just a few years and then they move on. I wanted something bigger. It's so scary mentioning these things online, because sometimes when you talk about wanting more for yourself, people can get, a bit weird about it. Like, why is it not enough for you? And I found that the way to get what I really wanted was through an exchange program. This is a beautiful time for me to link this video of mine. In that video, I talk all about how I did end up transferring to a university in London where, honestly, all of my academic dreams and aspirations were just met, even exceeded at this point. I was like, that's more like it. This is it. This is the experience I signed up for. And I am so grateful that I got to end my degree just feeling so satisfied and feeling so ecstatic and happy. And don't get me started on all of the exposure that happened while I was at university in London. Things were looking very much up, and then the pandemic hit, and look, of all the things that I had taken into consideration, being in Boris Johnson's Great Britain during a pandemic, of all things, that was not on my bingo card for the year 2020 at all. And so, low-key against my will, but with no other option, I returned to Zimbabwe following my degree and ended up staying in Zimbabwe much longer than I had anticipated I would. So as you've heard from my narration, the plan for my life, for my career, for my education meandered so far away than my initial desires. It's so funny because, again, I want to mention that same Condoleezza Rice documentary / interview. She says that often she's asked by young people, how can I get to a position where I'm doing like what you're doing? And I'm paraphrasing. Her response was along the lines of, well, you need to start off by being a failed musician. And check. The person sitting before you making this video is so like a different person completely from the person who graduated on the 12th of July of 2020. My mind has changed so many times. The other day I was reading back an interview that I did, and of course on the final question they were asking me about my plans to come. I just had to giggle reading my response. To think this was, a response I gave less than 5 years ago. It just goes to show that we just change so much. We come into new information, our lives go in different ways, things happen. So here is my advice to you.